What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
When I asked my mom to help with my medical bills, she sighed so long and so loud I thought the call had dropped. She didn't say, "Let me see what I can do," or "We'll figure this out together," or even a goddamn, "I'm sorry you're going through this." No. Instead, with the same dry tone she used when I forgot to send a birthday card to Aunt Cheryl, she said, "We can't keep rescuing you, Lauren." That was it. No pause. No hesitation. Just that. Cold, clean, final. I sat on the floor of my living room with that phrase echoing through my ears, surrounded by medical paperwork and past due notices, and all I could think was, I haven't asked you for anything in over 10 years. But even if I had, how do you say that to your daughter? I didn't even cry right away. I hung up, stared at the wall, and did what people like me do when the world kicks us in the ribs. We check out. I picked up my phone, thumb scrolled aimlessly like muscle memory, and almost instantly landed on Facebook. First post on my feed was a video from my mom, timestamped less than a minute ago. The kind that autoplays, whether you want it to or not. My brother Ethan was on screen, standing in front of a lake cabin with one of those big novelty bows on the front door, the kind you only see in Lexus commercials and Hallmark movies. Mom was behind the camera, laughing and crying and filming him unwrapping a set of keys like it was Christmas morning and he was 5 again. "You deserve this, baby," she whispered from behind the camera, her voice trembling with joy. "Your dad would be so proud." And Ethan, in his backwards baseball cap and cargo shorts, hugged her with one arm while filming himself with the other. I swear to you, my stomach twisted so hard it felt like it collapsed in on itself. I sat there frozen, blinking at the screen while my body tried to process what my mind already knew. This wasn't just another case of my mom playing favorites. This was a declaration. This was a damn line drawn in the sand. A public one. On social media. For everyone to see. For me to see. Now, before you start wondering if maybe I've always been some sort of family screw-up, or that maybe I drained them dry over the years, let me set the record straight. I'm 38. I've worked since I was 17. I put myself through college. I got married young, made a decent life, until life turned around and threw me straight into hell. I got sick, chronic autoimmune disease, the kind with no neat cure and no clear prognosis. It robbed me of my full-time job, my marriage, and most of my energy. Still, I kept going. I picked up freelance gigs, sold off furniture, even offered tutoring for neighborhood kids just to stay afloat. I didn't ask anyone for help until I was at the end of my rope, when the hospital bills started coming in faster than I could open them, and the side effects of not taking the right meds became scarier than the illness itself. And Ethan? Let's talk about Ethan. My younger brother by 3 years. The golden boy. The family's pride. Ethan didn't graduate college, but he made good connections. He's charming in that beer commercial kind of way, big smile, always cracking jokes, always knows a guy. He's had at least 5 different jobs in the past 10 years, none of which lasted longer than 18 months. He's borrowed money from mom more times than I can count. Car repairs, new apartment, startup idea, poker losses, you name it. And each time, she gave it with a smile and a pat on the hand, like she was giving him allowance for mowing the lawn. "Boys make mistakes," she'd say every single time. When I'd bring it up gently, carefully, she'd look at me like I was speaking another language. "You're stronger," she'd say, as if that justified letting him coast through life while I clung to the edge. There's a moment from our childhood I always come back to. I was maybe 9, Ethan was 6. We were riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, racing down the hill near our house. I hit gravel, wiped out hard, and broke my wrist. While I screamed in pain, Ethan snuck off, threw a rock through old Mr. Halbert's shed window, and ran home crying, pretending he saw a man in the bushes. My mom came running out when she heard the commotion. She took one look at me bleeding, cradling my arm, and snapped, "What the hell were you doing going that fast?" Then she scooped up Ethan, who was pretending to sob, and kissed his forehead. Later that night, I got grounded for riding dangerously. Ethan got a Happy Meal for being so brave. That was the first time I realized love in our house wasn't about fairness, it was about performance. Ethan was a better actor. So when I saw that cabin video, all I could think about was how deeply I must have misunderstood what family means. That cabin wasn't new to me. Our dad talked about it when we were teenagers. Said one day, when he was gone, he wanted us to have a place we could go together. A place to fish, grill, bring our kids. He painted this picture like it was a future we were all guaranteed. When he died, the land was undeveloped, just something he'd paid off with savings. I'd assumed it was in limbo, maybe sold off, forgotten. Apparently not. Apparently, it was finished, furnished, and now handed over entirely to Ethan like some kind of royal inheritance. And not a word of it came to me until it popped up in a goddamn Facebook video. So yeah, when my mom said, "We can't keep rescuing you," it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. That I'm not worth saving. That I'm the drowning one and Ethan gets the lifeboat. That my pain is an inconvenience, and his mistakes are just part of the journey. But if she thought I'd let that go quietly, she's got another thing coming. Because something in me snapped that night, not in a dramatic, soap opera kind of way, but in a cold, quiet, surgical way. I stopped answering her calls. I blocked Ethan's number. And then I started remembering things, old conversations, buried documents, strange details about our dad's estate that never quite added up. Things I let slide back then because I didn't want to rock the boat. But now? Now I'm not trying to stay in the boat. I'm flipping the whole damn thing over. And, trust me, I've got just enough strength left in me to make sure they both know exactly what it feels like to need rescuing and not get it. For 2 days after that video, I didn't sleep properly, didn't eat more than a few spoonfuls of soup, and mostly just sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of unpaid medical bills like they were a puzzle missing half its pieces, as if I could will the numbers to rearrange themselves into something manageable, something survivable, something that didn't make me feel like I was one more bad week away from total collapse, and yet, beneath all the fear and anxiety, something else was building. Too, slowly, like smoke seeping through the cracks of a sealed door, something darker, something tighter, something that had a purpose, rage. Not the screaming kind that explodes in your chest and makes you throw things or punch pillows. No, I'm talking about the kind that settles deep in your gut like old oil, thick and slow, the kind that doesn't come with tears but with clarity, the kind that keeps your mind spinning in the middle of the night as you replay every past conversation, every subtle betrayal you dismissed as just the way things are, every moment your instincts told you something was wrong but you smiled and nodded. Anyway, to keep the peace. I watched that video again more than once, though I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to study the details, to look for something, anything, that might explain how it all came to this. The cabin was bigger than I imagined, fully built, wraparound porch, cedar siding, full lake view, the kind of place you could retire to, not just visit on weekends. Ethan looked like a kid on Christmas morning, his face split wide with the kind of grin I hadn't seen on him since our dad passed away, and I'll admit, for half a second I thought, maybe this was her way of keeping him from falling apart again. But then I heard her voice behind the camera, shaky with pride, saying, "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become," and something in me cracked wide open, because I knew for a fact my dad never once used that kind of language about Ethan. Not even when he was alive, not even when he was trying to be kind. That was when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years, because I'd buried it in the fog of grief. Back when our dad was sick, in the last year before the cancer took over everything, he and I had gone out to that empty plot by the lake. It wasn't much back then, just a stretch of land with a few surveyor stakes and a pile of lumber someone had delivered late, but we stood there in the afternoon light, him leaning on his cane, and he told me in that raspy voice of his, "I bought this for both of you. So you'd always have a place that's yours. Not mine. Yours. You and Ethan. Equally." He even laughed a little and said, "God knows I won't be around to play referee, so try not to kill each other over the thermostat." That memory hit me like a freight train. Because if Dad meant for both of us to have it, and I was never told otherwise, how the hell did it end up entirely in Ethan's name without so much as a text message? I pulled out my old documents, the ones from when Dad's will was executed, the ones I'd barely glanced at back then because everything was too raw and I trusted my mother to handle it all fairly. But now, under the dim yellow light of my kitchen, I went through every page like a detective at a crime scene, highlighting lines, cross-referencing dates, and searching for anything that might explain how one child went from co-owner to invisible. It didn't take long before I found the name I hadn't thought about in a decade, Aunt Jenny, Carol's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years, not since some long-forgotten argument about money or pride or both. But Jenny had been listed as a secondary executor, a backup in case Carol couldn't or wouldn't fulfill her duties, and my dad must have had a reason for that. I tracked down her number through an old email chain and, with trembling fingers and zero expectations, I called. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring, her voice a little groggy, like she wasn't used to calls anymore. But when I introduced myself, she went quiet for a second before saying, "Lauren? Oh, honey. I was wondering when you'd call. I didn't have time for pleasantries." I asked her straight out what she knew about the cabin, about the will, and about the way things had been handled after Dad passed. She sighed so long I thought she might hang up, but then she said, "Your father told me he wanted that cabin split between you and your brother. 50-50. I saw the draft of the will myself. Then Carol took over everything after he died. She told me it was too complicated for me to be involved. Said the lawyer was handling it." I believed her. I asked her if she had a copy. She said she didn't, but she remembered the lawyer's name, a man named Glenn Travers who used to do estate work out of a small office downtown. He'd probably retired by now, but it was a place to start. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just emotional betrayal. This might have been legal. And if that was true, then it wasn't just favoritism. It was theft. Theft in the polite, well-dressed, notarized way that only happens in families where one person is trusted to do the paperwork and the other is too tired to ask questions. That night, I barely slept again. But not because I was scared. This time, it was different. I lay in bed with a pad of paper, scribbling notes, drawing timelines, writing questions, planning next steps. Because if there's one thing my mother forgot, it's that people like me, the ones you cast aside, the ones you say no to when they're desperate, those people don't go away. We remember. We wait. We dig. And I had just begun digging. Because something about this whole thing reeked, not just of favoritism, but of manipulation. Of something more deliberate. Something my mom had tried to bury while dressing it up in good intentions and big bows and teary Facebook videos. And I was going to find it. Piece by piece. Page by page. And once I did, I wasn't going to scream or cry or demand anything. No. I was going to show up exactly like she never expected with proof. And then I was going to flip her perfect little world upside down. Because the thing about lies is, they're easy to wrap in ribbons, but eventually the tape gives out. There's a particular kind of ache that sets in once the shock wears off, when you're no longer running on adrenaline or rage or disbelief, but instead you're simply sitting with the weight of what's been done to you, and it stops being abstract. It stops being hypothetical, and it becomes real, so real that it settles in your bones, behind your eyes, at the base of your spine, until even the most ordinary moments start to carry the taste of betrayal. That's the place I was in the week after I spoke with Aunt Jenny, the week I spent digging through everything I'd saved, everything I'd once thought irrelevant or outdated or too painful to revisit, and somewhere deep in the back of my bedroom closet, inside an old banker's box I hadn't opened since the year after my dad died, I found something that made the world stop moving for a few seconds. It was a book, one of those old hardcovers with a faded red dust jacket, spine cracked and pages dog-eared from years of use. It wasn't anything important, just a novel I vaguely remembered him handing me when I was in high school, telling me it had good bones, which was his way of saying he liked the writing even if the story didn't quite hit. But what mattered wasn't the book itself. What mattered was what was inside. Tucked between the pages like a forgotten bookmark was an envelope, no stamp, no return address, just my name in his handwriting, the unmistakable slope of the R and the way the A looked like an O if you didn't know better. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a long time, holding it in my lap like it might evaporate if I moved too fast, like it might turn to dust if I breathed too hard. And when I finally slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the paper inside, I swear to you, I could still smell his cologne faintly on the page, that mix of cedar and old leather that always made him feel like home. The letter wasn't long, but it said more than my mother ever had in 10 years of conversations. He wrote that he knew things weren't equal between Ethan and me, that he'd seen it for years, but hadn't known how to fix it without making things worse. He said he worried about me, not because I wasn't strong, but because I was too strong, the kind of strong that learns to carry pain without showing it, the kind that gets overlooked because she never complains, never demands, never breaks down in front of people. He said he wanted to make sure that, no matter what happened after he was gone, I would be taken care of, that I'd have a place to breathe, to rest, to exist without constantly fighting for the bare minimum. And then he wrote something that changed everything. I set up a trust in your name, Lauren. It's not much, but it's yours. I didn't tell your mother the full amount. I needed you to have something of your own. I must have read that line 20 times. A trust. In my name. Hidden, or at least partially hidden, from my mother. And yet, after he died, nothing had ever been mentioned. No letter. No account. No conversation. Just silence. And now I knew why I had always felt like there was something missing, like some part of his plan had been erased without a trace. I called Aunt Jenny again the next morning, told her about the letter, read it to her line by line. She didn't sound surprised, which somehow made it worse. She said he didn't trust her with it, Lauren. I remember him saying that. He said if she got her hands on everything, she'd split it how she sees fit. His words. Not mine. I asked her if it was even possible to track something like that down, after all these years, and she told me it depended on the kind of trust, on who was named as trustee, and on whether it was ever activated after his death. The legal mess would be complicated, and probably expensive, but if there was paper somewhere, she believed we could find it. With that, I spent the next several days doing the kind of research I used to find exhausting, but now did with laser focus. I called banks, looked up the name of the attorney Aunt Jenny mentioned, Glenn Travers, who had indeed retired, but still had an old assistant running his records. After a little convincing and a few well-placed emotional truths, she agreed to meet with me and show me what files remained. She didn't say much when I arrived at the office, a converted bungalow on the edge of town, filled with too many filing cabinets and the smell of dust and old coffee, but she handed me a manila folder without a word, and when I opened it, there it was, the original copy of the trust, dated 2 months before Dad died, naming me as the sole beneficiary of a modest but meaningful sum of money, tucked away in a private account, to be released upon his passing. The catch? It had already been claimed. 3 months after the funeral. Signed off not by me, but by someone with power of attorney. My mother. The assistant looked uncomfortable when I pointed it out, said she didn't know the full story, just that the paperwork had come in, looked official, and had been processed without question. I didn't blame her. I knew exactly who to blame. That night, I sat at my dining room table with the trust paperwork on one side, the medical bills on the other, and my father's letter in the middle, and I realized the truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud for years. My mother had taken what was meant for me, not out of need, not out of desperation, but out of control. She had looked at that account and decided that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, or wouldn't have the guts to come looking. And maybe she was right. For a long time, I didn't. But now? Now I was looking. And I wasn't going to stop. Because it wasn't just about the money anymore, or the cabin, or even the years of second place. It was about knowing that someone I loved, someone I trusted to act in my best interest, had stolen something that was supposed to be mine, not just financially, but emotionally. My security. My protection. My peace. And the worst part? She did it all with that same polite smile, that same condescending tone, the same tired line about how Ethan needed it more, how I was stronger, how everything would work out in the end. Well, I was going to make damn sure it did. But not the way she thought. Not with tears or pleading. Not with phone calls or family interventions. No, I had something better. I had the truth. I had the paper. And for the first time in a long time, I had the fire to do something with both. because now it was my turn to take something back. There's something that happens when clarity replaces confusion, when grief makes room for anger not as a passing flare-up, but as a steady, guiding force, when the shock of betrayal loses its sting and all that remains is the cold, calculated recognition of what must be done. That was where I found myself, not weeping on the bathroom floor like the old Lauren might have done, not calling old friends for advice or writing emotionally charged emails that would sit in my drafts folder, never sent, but sitting upright, fully awake at 3 a.m, with a notebook in my lap, a spreadsheet on my laptop, and a plan beginning to form with the precision of a scalpel. By then, I had read every page of the trust documents twice, highlighting the dates, names, and signatures that didn't belong to me, circling the transactions my mother had somehow authorized without my knowledge, and noting down every inconsistency like I was preparing to defend myself in court. The financial betrayal, while devastating, no longer felt paralyzing. It felt like ammunition. But the piece that shifted everything, the thread that turned my slow burn into a fuse, was what I discovered about the lake cabin, not just that it had once been meant for both of us, which I already knew, but that it still legally bore my name in a way my mother hadn't accounted for. Because here's the thing about property, especially rural property that was purchased and partially deeded under your father's name before development. Sometimes the paperwork isn't as clean as people think it is. My dad, ever the half-planner, had originally listed the cabin land under a trust that included both me and Ethan, intending for us to inherit equal shares. Somewhere along the line, after his death and after Carol had taken the reins, things had been shifted, paperwork altered, possibly rewritten, but what no one noticed, or perhaps what no one bothered to correct, was that the original title of the land had never been fully transferred out of that initial trust, meaning that legally, my name was still attached to the property, not as a visitor or a symbolic heir, but as a partial owner. I confirmed it after speaking with a real estate lawyer, a woman named Deidre who wore her sarcasm like armor and didn't blink once when I told her I was looking to reclaim my half of a family property that had been stolen right out from under me. She pulled the property records, went quiet for a long moment as her eyes scanned the screen, then looked up and said, "Well, this is messy, but not impossible. If I were you, I'd start by filing a notice of ownership claim and a partition letter. That'll get their attention." I didn't ask what that meant in legal terms. I asked what it would feel like. Deidre smirked and said, "It'll feel like someone just put a stranger's name on the deed to your house and announced they're moving in." That was all I needed to hear. The next day, I filed the claim. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, delivered by courier, signed and sealed. Just a quiet declaration that I owned 50% of the cabin that my mother had gifted to Ethan like it was some reward for breathing. Then, without warning, I listed my half of the property on a popular vacation rental site. I didn't stage photos or write up romantic descriptions. I just uploaded what was already public, the Facebook video, the screenshots of the cabin, and a short line that read, "Partial owner listing her share for temporary rental while resolving legal rights." Within 48 hours, it had over 100 views. By the end of the week, I had 5 serious inquiries and 1 booking confirmed. I knew the news would reach Ethan fast, but even I was surprised by the speed. He called me twice, then 3 times, voicemails filled with confusion and that familiar brand of entitled outrage I'd grown up with, demanding to know what the hell I thought I was doing, claiming I was ruining his peace, accusing me of being spiteful, vindictive, mentally unstable. I didn't answer. I let him leave his angry little messages, one after the other, and then I emailed him a scanned copy of the deed from the county records office, with my name clearly printed right beneath his, followed by a formal request for either a buyout of my share or a sale of the entire property to divide the proceeds. The next call wasn't from Ethan. It was from Carol. She didn't start with "hello," or "how are you," or any of the normal ways a mother might reach out to a daughter she hadn't spoken to in months. She started with a tone that was already trembling with rage, the kind that builds from fear masked as indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" she said, her voice shaking in a way I hadn't heard since my dad's funeral. "Do you have any idea what this is going to do to your brother?" I remember pausing, making sure she could hear me take that breath, that deliberate breath, and then I said, as calmly as I could, I think it's going to teach him what it feels like to lose something you thought would always be yours. She started to speak again, louder this time, more desperate, but I cut her off before the next syllable left her mouth. Mom, I said, you stole from me. You stole what Dad gave me, and then you pretended like I didn't matter. Now I'm just taking back what's mine. Nothing more. Nothing less. She hung up without saying another word. I sat there for a while after that call ended, not feeling triumphant, not even satisfied really, but strangely at peace. Because revenge, if we can even call it that, isn't always about fireworks or confrontations or screaming matches that end in slamming doors. Sometimes it's about showing up quietly with facts and signatures and leverage and saying, no, I'm not asking anymore. I'm taking. I didn't want to ruin Ethan's life. I just wanted my part of it back. And if that meant making him uncomfortable, forcing him to sell the cabin, reminding him that he wasn't the only person our father loved, then so be it. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't asking anyone to rescue me. I was rescuing myself. It's strange how silence, when you finally arrive at it after years of noise, chaos, manipulation, and emotional ransom disguised as love, doesn't come with the dramatic thunderclap you imagine. Doesn't fall upon your world like a crashing wave or a shattering window. It simply appears, like fog rolling in after the storm has passed, slow and dense and absolute, not demanding attention, but instead pressing gently against every part of your life until you notice that the shouting has stopped. The phone has gone quiet. The air no longer carries the tension of unspoken blame or the thread of guilt wrapped in maternal sweetness, and for the first time in what might be decades, you are left entirely alone with yourself, and it feels like oxygen. The sale of the cabin didn't take long, not after the paperwork became a headache Ethan could no longer ignore, and not after the offers started rolling in faster than either of us expected. Because apparently Lake property has become the new gold rush for people in midlife crises who want an escape from their own unhappy marriages, and once Ethan realized that renting it out would require my cooperation every step of the way, he did what he always does when something becomes inconvenient. He gave up. Or, to put it more precisely, he folded, like he always had whenever responsibility showed up wearing a name tag. He called me, not to apologize, not to reconcile, but to ask, in a voice tinged with forced indifference, if we could just sell the damn thing and move on. I agreed without hesitation. Not because I wanted to move on, not in the way he meant it, but because I knew dragging the process out wouldn't heal anything, wouldn't give me closure, wouldn't make Carol call me sobbing with guilt or Ethan suddenly transform into a brother capable of remorse or accountability. I agreed because I was done playing the part of the forgotten daughter, the backup plan, the woman they only remembered when something needed fixing or someone needed blaming. I agreed because I had finally understood that justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your dignity intact, holding the one thing no one else thought you'd keep, your power. We split the proceeds down the middle. My half was enough to pay off my medical debt, finally. It was enough to hire a specialist who didn't rush me out of the office after 10 minutes. It was enough to replace my broken-down car with something safe and reliable, something that didn't stall at stoplights or make me nervous every time the temperature dropped below freezing. But more than all of that, it was enough to buy me peace, not the kind that's permanent, because I know better than to believe in fairy tales, but the kind that gives you space to breathe, to stand still, to stop bracing for the next emotional ambush disguised as a family update. And with that money, I did something I hadn't expected, something that wasn't part of the plan I had scribbled onto legal pads in the middle of sleepless nights. I made a donation. Not to spite them. Not to virtue signal. But because I needed to honor the part of the story that wasn't corrupt, the part that still felt pure. I donated a portion of my share to a medical charity in my father's name, one that funds treatment for people like me, people who get sick and scared and don't have the luxury of a safety net. I didn't tell anyone I did it. There was no plaque, no newsletter, no post on Facebook with a filtered photo of a giant check. I just mailed the donation with a short note that read, "In memory of the man who tried." Because whatever else my father was or wasn't, he had tried. And that mattered. As for Carol, well, true to form, she didn't reach out right away. In fact, she didn't reach out for almost 2 months. Then, one morning, just as spring was beginning to claw its way through the frost, I found her name flashing on my phone screen, the same way it had 100 times before. But this time, I let it ring. And ring. And ring. I didn't answer. I didn't send it to voicemail. I just let it echo into the air, like some final test I was now too disinterested to take. A few minutes later, she left a message. Her voice was brittle, a little slower than I remembered, like she had rehearsed the words in her head but couldn't quite say them out loud without cracking. She said, "I didn't know you hated me this much. I did what I thought was right. You never see it from my side." I replayed it once. Then I deleted it. Because I don't hate her. That's the part people never understand, the part that makes stories like this so hard to explain to people who've never lived it. I don't walk around with a heart full of fury, clutching a grudge like a lifeline. I don't want revenge in the way people think. What I want is peace. What I want is distance. What I want is the freedom to no longer carry the weight of a relationship that was always conditional, always transactional, always waiting for me to fail just enough that it could justify withholding love once again. There's an old photograph that sits on my bookshelf, tucked behind a row of paperbacks, not because I'm hiding it, but because I no longer need it to be front and center. It's of my dad, standing in front of that empty lot by the lake, long before it ever became a cabin, long before my mother decided that Ethan was the one who deserved it. He's holding a cup of gas station coffee, wearing that ratty windbreaker he never threw away, and smiling at something just out of frame. I keep it because it reminds me that there was once a version of this family that felt real, that felt honest, that hadn't yet been boiled down to a ledger of who owes what and who gives the most. I keep it because he loved me, not perfectly, not without blind spots, but deeply. And in the end, that's the part one chooses to carry forward. I walk past that photo every morning now, when I head out the door to whatever small part-time gig I've cobbled together, when I stop for groceries, when I return home to a quiet apartment where no one expects anything from me except presence. And sometimes, not every day, but sometimes I stop in front of it, place my hand on the shelf, and say out loud, "Don't worry, Dad. I figured it out." And I have. Not because I won. Not because they lost. But because I finally understood that silence, when chosen, can be louder than any apology never given.